It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. Starting today with an apology, actually. You know, the attack on the Capitol, you and I talked about it Thursday morning last, after the Wednesday attack. And at that time, I had no idea how serious this was, how brutal this was. I knew it was serious. I knew it was a terrible thing. I knew. But the scale, I was unaware of the scale. And I let you down on Thursday. And then for the Friday show, I had already planned to do an episode on the Biden administration's priorities for the first 2 years while they have that majority in the Senate. And frankly, I needed a day to process what had happened. Because as I spent the day Thursday reading and following coverage, I began to realize what I had missed, the gravity of this thing. I think it took me a couple of days. I don't know about you. Did it take a couple of days for this to sink in? Man. So I've spent Friday and through the weekend doing a lot of reading. Little show note here. I often share links. I'm going to share a whole list. Well, it's not the entire reading list, but the highlights of what I've been reading over the weekend. If you feel overwhelmed, if you feel like there's some information you still need, I'm going to give you the whole list. I'm going to post that on the Facebook page. Not that there isn't already a library filled with information, but I just thought I'd give you my personal archive. And if it's of any benefit to you, then great. Okay. Where do we begin? So you've probably heard the name Lin Wood. He's one of the late additions to the Orange Menace inner circle, serious conspiracy theorist, nut job lawyer. Well, I'm looking at a post right now from January 6th. They let them in, referring to the attackers on the Capitol. Get the firing squads ready. Pence goes first. He posted that on Parler, the right-wing social networking site, which has been making news in and of itself. It looks like they're pretty much shut down. Every vendor they work with has withdrawn their services. But, I mean, there's an example of the kind of incendiary language that those in security see all the time from the crazy guys, right? I mean, that's a daily occurrence. So security veterans, they don't take these kinds of posts lightly, but they do see them every day from various nut jobs. Well, this is after the attack has ensued by one of the president's closest advisors. So that puts it into a whole new league. And this is what I missed on Wednesday and even when I talked to you Thursday morning. Because a lot of the images we had seen were these clowns we'd been laughing at for a long time. A lot of the pictures we had seen were so-called protesters, kind of milling around, taking pictures, taking selfies, laughing. But now we learn that actual credible threats on people's lives, I mean, that was part of the deal. Now we all know. Handguns, assault rifles, spears, those zip tie handcuffs, they were all in the Capitol. Yeah, it took a while for this to sink in, to understand. Several first-hand reports of people hearing threats on Nancy Pelosi's life. A text was discovered from one of them armed with an assault rifle, saying that it was his intention to shoot the speaker on live TV, as he put it. Yep, took a couple days. It took a couple days for this to sink in. We can be caught off guard. We can see something happening right before us and not understand the gravity, not perceive what's actually happening, because it so far exceeds our expectations of what was even possible. Those pictures you saw, the guys who were carrying the zip ties, those plastic handcuffs, they weren't fooling around. And it turns out they were trained. One of the guys has been identified as, I think, a lieutenant colonel in the Army. I'm looking for my source on that. Yeah, you're gonna have to forgive me. I might not be able to properly source things today. I've got all this stuff here in front of me. I can tell you now I'm looking at Slate. Yeah, let me read a little bit of this to you. The writer is Dan Kois. I can't stop thinking about the zip tie guys. Amid the photos that flooded social media during Wednesday's riot at the Capitol, shirtless jokers in horned helmets, dudes pointing at their nuts, dumbasses carrying away souvenirs, the images of the zip tie guys were quieter, less exuberant, more chilling. And we'd better not forget what they almost managed to do. It's easy to think of the siege of the U.S. Capitol as a clown show with accidentally deadly consequences. A bunch of cosplaying, self-styled patriots show up, overwhelm the incomprehensibly unprepared Capitol Police, and then throw a frat party in the rotunda. The miscreants smear shit on the walls and steal laptops and smoke weed in conference rooms. Someone gets shot, someone else has a heart attack, possibly under ludicrous circumstances. When they finally get rousted, they cry to the cameras about getting maced. Those rioters, the bozos, were the ones who talked to the press, who waved gleefully to photographers, who selfied and streamed the entire afternoon without even a thought that there might ever be consequences. They were doing it for their Instagram, and their story overwhelms the narrative because their faces and voices dominated the day. But there were other rioters inside the Capitol. If you look at the images, and once you see them, it's impossible to look away. The zip tie guys. Call the zip ties by their correct name. The guys were carrying flex cuffs, the plastic double restraints often used by police in mass arrest situations. They walked through the Senate chamber with a sense of purpose. They were not dressed in silly costumes, but kitted out in full paramilitary regalia. Helmets, armor, camo, holsters with sidearms. At least one had a semi-automatic rifle and 11 Molotov cocktails. At least one, unlike nearly every other right-wing rioter photographed that day, wore a mask that obscured his face. So, part of a brief article from Dan Kois of Slate. Yeah, that's where I was. I was wrapped up in the coverage that looked like they were mostly harmless idiots. And maybe a couple of them got out of hand. But, yeah, as the headline says, these guys were out for blood. And how we could think anything less, shame on us, shame on me. We all saw what happened in the case of Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan. The plot uncovered there. Yeah, a sizable contingent of the attackers were absolutely ready, willing, and able to capture, to kidnap, to kill. The images that really got me were from one of the attackers. I guess it was about 39 minutes, as I recall. It started outside before the breach. So the video shows the progression of things from outside, overwhelming the guards at the perimeter, to scaling the wall, breaking the window, climbing in, wandering the halls, the chaos inside. This was the first time I'd seen the numbers. When I talked to you on Thursday, I didn't even realize the numbers of people who were in there. I didn't know. So this video showed, packed in shoulder to shoulder, hundreds at a time, facing down the outmanned security. And then right about at the 35-minute mark of the video, we see the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. She herself, ready, willing, prepared to kill, right there at the door, at the threshold of the House chambers. And as it's happening, so many of us just kind of in the dark. I guess the media, they're trying to do their job, but only a select few were actually inside, and even they were not in the melee. They were scurried off to be protected along with members of the House and Senate. We talked Thursday about the great job that Lisa Desjardins did, reporter from PBS. But where she was and what I saw on live television was kind of an isolated hallway where suddenly there were half a dozen or a dozen deplorables, and they were quickly subdued by security forces who had them on the floor at gunpoint. Now, this is pretty dramatic, but that's what I thought. That's what I thought was happening in the building. I had no idea that at that very time there were hundreds and hundreds, shoulder to shoulder, screaming, yelling, armed, overwhelming security at every new entry point, until they were finally stopped at the House chamber door. Heard firsthand from a Reuters photographer. I'm looking at the story now. Not reported until Friday. A Reuters photographer said he heard at least 3 pro-Trump rioters at the Capitol on Wednesday saying they wanted to find Vice President Mike Pence and execute him by hanging from a Capitol Hill tree as a traitor. It was a common line being repeated. Many more were just talking about how the VP should be executed, he said. This, of course, just moments after the President of the United States rage tweeted against Mike Pence for performing his constitutional duty in accepting the electoral votes for Joe Biden. Yeah, is this still sinking in for you? So it takes us well into the night, Wednesday night, and then into Thursday to learn Ashley Babbitt's name, to learn of 3 others who died, including a Capitol Police officer bludgeoned to death by a fire extinguisher. And then last night we learn another Capitol Police officer dies reportedly of suicide. So if this is still sinking in, it was far, far worse than we first imagined and that we first even saw. I mean, we're watching this happen live, but we haven't got the access of the attackers. Again, the reporters were on the periphery. They were outside. They were in protected areas down in the basement of the Capitol building. It was the attackers themselves who provided the images, the pictures, the videos that we saw 24, 36 hours later. And not only was it much worse than we realized, according to an Atlantic headline that caught my eye, it was supposed to be so much worse. Again, this took a day or 2 to report out. The plans for kidnapping, for murder, could have been, and according to the attackers, should have been, far, far worse than it was. Which brings us to the security forces, the Capitol Police, who heroically put this thing down before it reached its intended height. Now, as the story has shifted from one focus to another, that's been the focus here recently, in the last 24 hours. The nature of that security. And there's plenty to criticize, but first, before we go any further, let's acknowledge the really, truly heroic efforts of a handful of Capitol cops. So, to be clear, without tarnishing their efforts at all, without dismissing them one little bit, the story also has to include those guards who, and you can see it in the video taken by the attackers themselves, some guards taking selfies, opening doors, basically allowing this to happen, some of them. Others, I got the distinct impression that they were just so obviously overwhelmed by the numbers that they give the appearance of acquiescing to the attackers, but really they're just being realistic. It's like, there's nothing we can do. There literally might be 1 or 2 at a particular breach point and hundreds of armed attackers ready to just run them down. So with numbers like that, I guess you can't blame a guy for just doing everything he can, trying to de-escalate, trying to talk to him, rather than being the big tough cop. At that point, what are you going to do? Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund, who has since resigned, has given a lengthy interview. I'm going to recommend you read. I'll attach the link. I'm pretty sure it's the Washington Post, where he describes the day and how days before the event, he was asking for a stronger perimeter. He was asking for the National Guard. And then during the event, and immediately, even before the breach, he was asking for more help. Once they got in, now he's begging for help, and he keeps getting denied. He keeps getting put off while it's happening. This is quite a timeline here that's published in the Post, this Sund interview. On more than one occasion, actually several times, the response he gets is, well, no, it won't look good for the National Guard to have a heavy presence. We don't like the optics of that. Do you remember over the summer the iconic picture? Dozens and dozens and dozens of fully armed, fully outfitted National Guardsmen standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Remember that one? Yeah, there's an optic for you. Now, here's another extremely disturbing angle of the story, and that is the institutional racism that somehow justified these decisions prior to the event on how security forces will plan for this event. Well, it's white people. We can trust them. It's time for another confession. I myself didn't foresee this. I knew they were capable of horrendous violence, but I thought it would happen against counter-protesters. For me anyway, personally, and maybe for you as well, the idea that they would actually break into the Capitol with the intent of kidnapping and or killing members of Congress and Mike Pence, that thought didn't enter my mind. But now it's only after the fact that there's widespread reporting of all the social media planning. So if I'm going to beat myself up a little bit today, and I am, I should have known this. I should have had a better handle on this. Well, the Capitol Police, the National Guard, the U.S. military, they should have had a better handle on this. Intelligence agencies, are we monitoring social media or not? How in the world could you miss this? And you may think, well, there's your answer. They didn't miss it. They were okay with it. And it's hard not to entertain that idea. And just one more time, I'll repeat, there were heroes among law enforcement on that fateful day. I'm talking about others. I'm talking about leadership. I'm talking about not only possible, but almost certain infiltration among the ranks. We know for a fact, this is no longer speculation, we know for a fact that there's serious infiltration of organized racists, KKK, Proud Boys, militia, white supremacists, conspiracy theorists, QAnon. We know that they are in the military, in police forces, in the Capitol Police, in the National Guard, in numbers. We know this. This is no longer speculation. The investigations at this point need to find them, root them out, need to determine the numbers, the extent of influence within these security institutions. But we know it's there. We know it is. Charles Pierce of Esquire, writing on Friday. Again, all of this was happening on Friday and over the weekend. Wednesday, Thursday, a lot of really unhelpful analysis. So, Charles Pierce of Esquire. The story of Wednesday's insurrection at the Capitol continues to get worse. There's a slow but steady accumulation of evidence that in some major ways there may have been help on the inside. And then he quotes from the Washington Post, the kind of things we were talking about. Ordered to stand down, ordered to limit their participation, the Guard, and the delays in offering any sort of assistance when it was being not only requested, but literally begged for. Meanwhile, the Capitol Police suffered from a mysterious collapse of its rudimentary intelligence gathering function, which in this case included such technological puzzles as surfing the internet and watching the TV. It was there for all to see in social media, the planning, the plotting. Nobody took it seriously. Security forces didn't, the media didn't, I didn't. Pierce continues, it's not just the video of Capitol Police officers seeming to open up the barricades or the videos of them tenderly helping rioters down the Capitol steps after the damage was done. For months now, people have been wondering exactly how many white supremacist Trump sympathizers there are in our country's various law enforcement agencies. That question has taken on a bit of urgency this week. No kidding. You know, even after the worst was over and it was winding down and the Guard finally showed up and they were, as this reporter describes, tenderly helping rioters down the Capitol steps. I remember when I was seeing those images thinking, well, what the hell? I imagine you probably thought this too. As the rioters are just calmly filing out of the building, being escorted, the security forces, the Capitol Police at that point looked like flight attendants, just standing at the door. Bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye now, bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye now. What the hell? At this point, It's getting to be like 6 o'clock at night. The terror is over. They're leaving. Why in the hell wasn't that building completely surrounded? Why weren't there security forces at every single exit, escorting the attackers single file right onto buses, each one of them to be booked and jailed? Now this, I can say, this didn't take a day or two to sink in. This I was seeing live. Attackers filing out. And I thought, how in the hell is this even possible? Why are they not being loaded onto buses? Why are they not being booked? Every single goddamn one of them. That was crazy to me. At least I had the good sense to see that. This is a part of the story that is going to have to be pursued by investigative journalists, by House and Senate committees, by every intelligence agency, by every state house. And that is the extent to which white supremacists are running things in the military, in the police forces across the country, in the Capitol Police, not to mention Customs and Border Patrol, ICE. We know about that. At least we've had ample evidence over the last few years. We know that police unions, we're a big fan of unions around here. This is something else over the last few years. It took me a while to understand that police unions are not your garden variety unions. No, they are bastions of white supremacy. For the most part, they all endorsed the Orange Menace in both of his runs for president. We've now had plenty of time to reflect on police forces across the country and how they dealt with Black Lives Matter. We all know how the thin blue line flag has become basically an anti-black symbol. It's a racist symbol. There can be no doubt, no question. The head of the Chicago Fraternal Order of Police coming out vocally in support of the rioters who attacked the Capitol, excusing them merely as protesters, echoing their arguments about how they're losing their freedom and they've been ignored by the elites and they have every right to voice their frustration. Trespassing the Capitol isn't such a big crime. It's just an inconvenience, is the word he used. So not only does that willfully misrepresent what happened, it ignores the attacker's lethal intent, and it ignores the very grand crime of literally treason, attacking the government of the United States with force, intent to kill. He's either ignoring or excusing all of that, willfully, because he ain't stupid. And not only that, add another layer, a level of hypocrisy heretofore unknown. And that is this line of thought compared with how he views Black Lives Matter protests and how his own police union members reacted to that. But how anyone can look at the preparation for this event and the reaction once it got underway, compared to what are now clear historical facts regarding an entire summer of protests for racial justice. Well, the comparisons are pretty clear. And now it's a matter of acknowledging that, making sure everyone understands it, and getting in and rooting out the avowed racists in law enforcement and the military. And no, it's not this sort of soft, feel-good kind of anti-racism. Oh, we have to all get along. We have to have sensitivity training. No, this is rooting out criminals. It's hard investigations and severe penalties against individuals and organizations with names and addresses. There's no let's move forward. There's no both siding this. Yeah, one of the guys in full tactical gear carrying the zip tie handcuffs, retired Lieutenant Colonel Larry Rendell Brock, Jr., a Texas-based Air Force Academy graduate. This is no longer a question. This is not a suspicion that police forces, military, are filled with white supremacists. Self-proclaimed militias are just filled with cops, with retired and active duty military. We know this. We're not guessing anymore. What we don't know is the extent, and what we haven't done is put an end to it. So even though some of these stories might just look like wild speculation, oh, they were in on it. Oh, they let it happen. And yeah, you can have pretty incendiary remarks from loudmouth activists. So it makes them sound like they're just mouthing off. Yeah, it might sound like that. But there is more than enough evidence for a sure-minded indictment of this infiltration. It's now just a matter of doing the legwork and rooting them out. And the damage that ensues on a day-to-day basis, most of it we don't see. We got a pretty good glimpse of it over the summer in the way police forces and federal forces dealt with Black Lives Matter. And now we have these very serious charges of not only negligence, not only just turning their back, but outright cooperation and planning for the Capitol attack. Recently elected Jamal Bowman, Democrat of New York, is drafting legislation to call for a commission to investigate Capitol Police and whether any of its members have ties, directly or indirectly, to white nationalists and white nationalist sympathizers. That according to Mother Jones, dated January 8, Friday. Yeah, it took all of Wednesday viewing this thing live, but having a skewed perspective all of Wednesday. All we saw were shots from the outside. We saw some video of the so-called demonstrators walking through the rotunda like tourists, snapping pictures. But we had no idea. And then Thursday it starts to take shape, and by Friday and through the weekend, now it's sinking in. I don't know where you are on this timeline. Maybe we're still in the process of discovering just how deep and foundational these questions are that have arisen from this attack that was at first, of course, shocking, but after 24 hours, after 36 hours, after 48 hours, it just continued to reveal itself as this tragic, existential, historic event. And will have tentacles reaching far into the future and deep into our psyches about how it happened, why it happened, what we should understand, what we should do about it. So maybe I should give myself a little bit of a break. That through the day Wednesday and into Wednesday night, and even into Thursday morning, I couldn't comprehend any of this. I just wasn't prepared. It just was not sinking in. And to be honest, I'm not sure where we are in the process right now. Maybe it's still sinking in. We're going to be talking about this all week. We haven't even talked about the political stories yet. We haven't talked today about impeachment, the Republicans' response. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. The social media angle, you know by now that the Orange Menace has been booted off pretty much every platform. So let's stay close together here, and let's stay on top of this. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and just make a one big post with all the links of what I've been reading since Thursday and Friday. And if it helps you, go ahead and peruse that. And that, of course, will be on the Charles Purcell Facebook page. All right. We'll get through this together. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.